Hey guys, welcome back to The Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled people story. Have you ever gotten mail that just felt wrong? I got a courtesy violation from a brand new HOA next door. I ignored it. Then came the fines. Then came the threats of a lien. I realized I was being targeted by one person on a mission, and a polite email wasn't going to stop her. So I prepared a single envelope that would end this war for good. I need to start this by saying I'm the kind of person who actually reads contracts before signing them. I work as a data analyst, so my whole job is basically finding patterns and spotting when numbers don't add up. That personality trait is probably what saved me in this whole mess, because when an HOA tried to muscle their way into my life, I had the tools to fight back. I've lived in my house for about 8 years now. It's on a quiet, older street with maybe 20 houses total, all built back in the 70s. The lots are big, the trees are mature, and most importantly, there's no HOA. That was actually one of the main reasons I bought here. I'd heard enough horror stories from friends about HOA fees, ridiculous rules about mailbox colors, and getting fined because your grass was half an inch too tall. No thanks. About 2 years ago, things started changing in our area. A developer bought up a massive chunk of land right next to our street and started building one of those fancy planned communities. You know the type. Cookie sea-cutter houses that all look identical, perfectly manicured lawns, streets named things like Heritage Boulevard and Prosperity Circle. The whole development had this pretentious name that included words like Summit and Point, which always makes me laugh because we're in the flattest part of the state. The two neighborhoods are separated by a thin line of trees and a small creek, but the entrance to the new place is just down the main road from where our street connects. I started noticing pretty quickly that the addresses could get confusing. Our street is in the hundreds, and from what I could see, their main street also had similar numbers. What really stood out, though, was this woman I started seeing around. She drove a pristine white golf cart and always had a clipboard. I'm talking always. Morning, afternoon, evening, this woman was out there patrolling the new development like she was guarding Fort Knox. She had this whole look too, the kind of rigid posture and tight expression that screamed she took herself very seriously. My neighbors and I would joke about her sometimes when we'd see her cruising by. We called her Clipboard Lady. We'd laugh about how glad we were that we didn't have to deal with that level of scrutiny over whether our trash cans were the approved shade of brown. Life went on pretty normally until about 6 months ago. That's when I got the first letter. It came in a regular white envelope, but the return address had the name of the new development and said HOA in bold letters. I almost threw it away thinking it was junk mail or maybe something meant for the previous owners, but curiosity got the better of me. I opened it up and found what they called a courtesy violation notice. The whole thing was formatted very officially, like someone had spent time making a template. It stated that my lawn was not in compliance with community standards. Specifically, they claimed my grass height was exceeding 6 inches and that I needed to remedy this immediately to avoid a fine. Here's the thing though, I had literally mowed my lawn 2 days before getting that letter. The grass was maybe 3 inches tall max. I keep my yard pretty tidy, not because I'm obsessed with it, but because I actually like doing yard work. It's relaxing after staring at spreadsheets all day. The letter included a photo, but it was so zoomed in and grainy that it could have been a picture of literally any grass anywhere. There were no identifying features, no house number visible, nothing that actually proved it was my property. I checked the address on the letter. It had my correct street address. My first thought was that this had to be a database error. Maybe when they were setting up their HOA system, some addresses got mixed up with the new development. Technology glitches happen all the time. I figured I'd just ignore it and they'd realize their mistake when they did their next audit or whatever HOAs do. Looking back now, I was so naive. I thought it was a simple mistake. I had no idea this was the beginning of a war I never even signed up for. 2 weeks went by and I'd pretty much forgotten about the whole thing. Then another envelope showed up. This one was labeled Second Notice and it was not friendly. They were now claiming I owed a fine of $75 for the unresolved lawn issue. But that wasn't even the most ridiculous part. They'd added a completely new violation. According to them, I had improperly stored trash cans that were visible from the street more than 12 hours after the designated pickup time. That violation came with a $50 fine. I had to read that twice because it made absolutely no sense. Our trash pickup is on Thursday, always has been, for the entire 8 years I've lived here. I looked at the date on the violation notice. They'd written it up on a Wednesday. That's when something clicked in my brain. The new development has their trash pickup on Tuesday. I'd noticed their trucks coming through on Tuesday mornings. So if they were looking at my house on a Wednesday, the day after their pickup day, and claiming my trash cans had been out too long, they were applying their rules to my property. This wasn't just a database error anymore. Someone was actively looking at my house and trying to enforce their HOA rules on me. I wasn't angry yet, but I was definitely annoyed. I found the contact information for their management company on the letter. It had some corporate-sounding name, the kind that tries to sound important. I sent them an email that was polite, but very clear. I explained that my property was not part of their HOA, never had been, and that they needed to remove my address from their system and cancel these bogus fines. I even included my deed information and the plat map reference for my subdivision, thinking that would clear everything up. The response I got back the next day was like talking to a wall. It was clearly a form letter. It basically said that according to their records, my property fell under HOA jurisdiction, and I should review the community guidelines. They even included a link to pay the fines online. That's when I realized this wasn't going to be solved with a polite email. Whatever system they had set up, it was designed to steamroll over complaints. Pay up or shut up seemed to be their attitude. I decided to wait and see what happened next. Part of me hoped they'd realize their error. The other part of me was already starting to get that feeling. The one you get when you know someone is about to push you too far. 3 weeks later, I got the third letter. This one made my blood boil. It was labeled Final Notice Before Lien, and the total fines were now up to $250. They'd added a new violation that was so petty I actually laughed out loud when I read it. Unapproved decorative lawn ornament. I have a metal sculpture of a heron in my front garden. My dad made it for me before he passed away about 5 years ago. He was a welder, and he loved making these quirky metal bird sculptures. The heron has some rust on it, giving it this beautiful weathered patina. It means the world to me. Every time I look at it, I think of him. According to the HOA, this sculpture violated something they called the Aesthetic Uniformity Clause. They wanted me to remove it. That was it. That was the line. You can send me stupid letters about grass height, you can fine me for imaginary trash violations, but you don't get to tell me to remove something my late father made with his own hands. The next Saturday, I was outside doing some gardening near the heron sculpture. The weather was nice, and I was actually in a pretty good mood despite the HOA nonsense. I was pulling some weeds when I heard the distinctive whir of an electric motor. I looked up, and there she was, clipboard lady in her white golf cart coming down the main road. But here's the thing that made my jaw drop. She didn't stay on the main road. She made a deliberate turn onto my street. My public street that has nothing to do with her development. She drove slowly past my house, stopped directly in front of my driveway, and just stared at me and the heron sculpture. She had this look on her face like she'd caught me doing something illegal. Then she made a big show of writing something on her clipboard, taking her sweet time about it. After that, she did a 3-point turn right there in the middle of the street and drove back toward her development. The whole thing probably took less than 2 minutes, but it told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't a computer error, this wasn't a mix-up in the database, this was one person who had decided that my property was part of her territory, and she was on a personal mission to bring me in line. It was then I realized this wasn't about rules, it was about power. This woman had decided my property was part of her little kingdom, and she was going to enforce her will no matter what reality actually said. That night, I made a decision. I was done playing defense. It was time to go on offense. I created a folder on my computer and another physical folder with printed documents. I saved every single letter they'd sent me. I printed out all the email exchanges. I wrote down a detailed timeline of every interaction, including the exact date and time I'd seen the golf cart lady on my street. Then I started doing research. Real research, not just Googling random stuff. I went to our county's official website and found their property records section. For a small fee, I could download certified copies of plat maps. I ordered the maps for both my subdivision and the new development. When they came in, I printed them in high resolution. The maps were crystal clear. There was my subdivision, with my property clearly marked. There was the new development, with a very obvious boundary line. My entire property was firmly outside their jurisdiction. There was a buffer zone of several hundred feet between the edge of their development and my property line. But I wasn't done yet. I did a public records search and found the HOA's founding documents. These are called Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions, or CC&Rs for short. They're basically the legal rulebook that defines what an HOA can and cannot do, and more importantly, exactly what land they have authority over. I spent an entire evening reading through these documents. Let me tell you, they were dry as dust, but I read every single word. And there it was, in black and white. The legal description of the land governed by the HOA. It matched the plat map perfectly. Their jurisdiction ended hundreds of feet from my property line. I had my ammunition. Now I needed to deliver it in a way they couldn't ignore. I spent the next few days drafting a letter. Not an email this time, a real physical letter that I was going to send via certified mail with return receipt requested. That meant they'd have to sign for it and I'd have proof they received it. No more claiming it got lost or they never saw it. I wrote and rewrote that letter probably 10 times. I wanted it to sound professional and intimidating without being hysterical. I wasn't some angry homeowner ranting about injustice. I was someone who had done their homework and was prepared to take legal action if necessary. The letter started with a formal subject line about cease and desist, unlawful harassment, and attempted extortion. Those are serious legal terms, and I used them deliberately. I laid out every single notice and fine I'd received, totaling up to $250. Then I made a very clear statement that my property was not and had never been subject to their rules. I included the legal description from my deed and referenced the county records. Then came the evidence. I attached copies of the certified county plat map showing exactly where their development ended and where my property sat. I also attached the relevant sections from their own CC&Rs that legally defined their boundaries. I made it impossible for them to claim confusion or honest mistake. My demands were simple. Stop contacting me immediately. Delete my name and address from all their records. Provide written confirmation within 10 business days that all fines had been canceled and my file had been permanently deleted. But here's the part I'm most proud of. The threat at the end. I wrote that if they failed to comply, I would hire a lawyer and pursue action not just against the HOA as an organization, but against the board members in their personal capacity for harassment. That personal capacity part is crucial. Most HOA board members are volunteers who think they're protected by the corporate structure. But harassment is a personal action, and you can go after individuals for it. Board members hate that because it means their personal assets could be at risk. I also said I would file formal complaints against their management company with the State Real Estate Commission and the Better Business Bureau. Management companies live and die by their reputation. The threat of regulatory complaints and bad reviews is serious business for them. Finally, I noted that all legal fees I incurred would be sought in the subsequent lawsuit. This is important because it means if I win, they pay for my lawyer. It makes the financial risk much higher for them. I ended with that classic phrase, govern yourselves accordingly. It's polite, but carries an unmistakable edge. I read through the final version one more time, printed it on good quality paper, signed it, and packaged it up with all the exhibits. I made 2 copies of everything. One went to the HOA president at the address listed on their website. The other went to the CEO of the management company. I took both packages to the post office and sent them certified mail, return receipt requested. The clerk asked if I wanted insurance on them, and I said no. The paper trail was all the insurance I needed. Then I waited. The first few days were quiet. I kept checking my mailbox, half expecting another violation notice to show up. Nothing came. On day 4, the first return receipt came back, signed. On day 6, the second one arrived, also signed. They'd received my letters, they'd read them. Now it was just a question of how they'd respond. A week went by, then 8 days, 9 days. I started wondering if they were going to ignore me and force me to actually follow through on getting a lawyer. I'd already contacted one just to have them on standby, and they'd said my case was solid. On the 9th business day, I came home from work and there was a plain white envelope in my mailbox. No fancy header, no official anything. Just a regular envelope with a return address that matched the development. I opened it up and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was typed, very simple and clearly written by someone who was furious but trying to keep it professional. The letter confirmed that my property was not within their jurisdiction. All prior notices were void. It was signed by the HOA secretary, not the president. There was no apology, no acknowledgement that they'd made a mistake, no explanation for why they'd harassed me for months. Just a bare minimum statement that complied with my demands. But you know what? That was enough. I'd won. I never received another piece of mail from them. Not a single letter, not an email, nothing. It was like I'd been erased from their system entirely, which was exactly what I wanted. About a week after getting that letter, I was outside in my front yard doing some weeding. It was a nice afternoon, and I was enjoying the peace and quiet. I heard that familiar electric motor sound and looked up to see the golf cart coming down the main road. She was on her usual patrol, clipboard in hand, surveying her domain. As she got closer to where the main road passes by the entrance to my street, I saw her notice me. She was maybe 50 yards away, but I could see the exact moment she recognized me. She hit the brakes on that golf cart so hard it jerked forward. Then she did this sharp, almost angry turn, spinning the cart around without ever letting it cross onto the public road. She drove back toward her development faster than I'd ever seen her move before. I looked over at my dad's heron sculpture, standing there with the afternoon sun making its rust glow like copper. It felt victorious somehow. The whole experience taught me something important about dealing with bullies, whether they're individuals or organizations. You can't just get angry and yell. That's what they expect, and they have systems in place to handle angry people. You have to be smarter than them. You have to use their own rules against them. This HOA thought they could push me around with official-looking letters and threats of fines and liens. They thought most people would either pay up to make it go away or just give up after fighting the bureaucracy for a while. They didn't count on someone who would actually do the research, find the facts, and present them in a way that made legal action a real possibility. The thing about HOAs is that they're used to dealing with people who actually live in their communities and sign the CC&Rs. Those people agreed to the rules even if they don't like them. But I never agreed to anything. I never signed their papers. My property was never part of their jurisdiction, no matter how much they wanted it to be. When you have the facts on your side and you present them clearly with evidence, most organizations will back down. They don't want the legal exposure. They don't want the hassle. They especially don't want board members facing personal liability. That's exactly what happened here. Once they saw I had the maps, the documents, and the knowledge to back up my position, and that I was willing to go to court if necessary, they folded. They had no choice. The law was not on their side. Sometimes I still see the golf cart lady doing her rounds. She stays well within the boundaries of her development now. She's never crossed onto my street again. Not once. I like to think she learned something about property lines and legal jurisdiction, but honestly, I doubt it. People like that don't usually learn. They just find new targets. But she won't be targeting me again. And every time I see that heron sculpture in my garden, I remember that you can't fine what you don't own, and you can't enforce rules that were never agreed to in the first place. My dad would have loved this whole story. He was always the type to stand up to bullies, whether they had clipboards or not. That heron he made is still standing right where it belongs, a rusty monument to the fact that sometimes the little guy wins as long as he's willing to do the work. The grass in my yard is whatever height it wants to be. My trash cans sit outside as long as they need to, and that metal heron watches over it all, a reminder that freedom isn't free, but it's always worth fighting for. The next one is a malicious compliance story. Part 1. The issue begins. I worked at a major tourist attraction during this time, and we got thousands of customers every day. Part of our attraction was outside, and we had expanded part of the outside to accommodate new parts for the attraction. In order to blend with the theme of the new section, a brand new brick pavement was installed in the area. Upper management had at the time a tendency to not think things 100% through, and this was no different. The big thing was that it was decided not to install an anti-slip surface on the brick pavement. Now we were in the middle of summer and it was a particularly dry summer, but nonetheless when it isn't dry we got a lot of rain and a lot of snow and frost. We need that anti-slip surface. We told upper management this and as per usual fell on deaf ears. Winter comes far too soon, and with it all the rain that was meant for summer and to make up for a dry autumn. And the winter of 2022 was bad for the UK. Temperatures fell to single digits and then negative in the Celsius. With the cold came a permanent frost over the brick pavement and the beginning of malicious compliance. Part 2. The compliance. The first slips and falls heralded us to the idea. At the time, the company required us to write in paper accident and incident reports about everything if something bad happened. Now, anyone who's worked in tourist attractions, we've all seen kids fall from being too excited, and we often do a polite to see if blood/gore/missing limbs are present. And if all is good, we just ignore it. No one likes paperwork. Not to mention, due to upper management's distaste for us, we had to take the long way to the offices where the paper was to fill it in, and get someone to cover us while we filled it in. Upper management hated us being in their special offices and not out with the paying customers. It is worth mentioning in their defense our lower managers and middle managers were on our side because even they knew what upper management was doing was utter nonsense, so they saw what we were doing and agreed with it. What happened was every single slip that occurred outside on the impromptu ice rink that was the brick pavement we would report. That's about 15 to 20 minutes of us in the warmth, not freezing our butts off, writing about how someone had slipped in the exact same manner as the last 10 people, all in plain view of upper management. I like to believe they began working from home more due to us being there in their office. I learned from one of our lower managers that is a dear friend that the stack of reports handed to upper management was measurable in inches. I do not regret saying I was one of the top 3 contributors to that pile. Part 3. The bare minimum response. Upper management finally began to make efforts to fix the situation. They decided to just cordon off the vast majority of the brick pavement with temporary, ugly barriers and put down anti-slip mats to make a path for the parts of the attraction that they wanted visitors to walk in. They thought they had won. We knew better. Anyone who has worked with tourists knows that tourists are a special breed of stupid. Told not to touch the very important items, they will touch. Told to keep their kids near and not let them wander off. I think the record for no lost kids was 4 hours. And so these barriers that everyone is required to respect, well, clearly it doesn't apply to me. Each time we told people not to go underneath these barriers, they looked like deer caught in the headlights. And the barriers were just low enough that kids would duck under and run straight onto the ice and onto their butts. Even more accident and incident reports rocked up as a result, and all upper management would do is tell us low, barely above minimum wage earners to do a better job policing this part of the attraction. Part 4. Wake-up call. School kids. Oh, how we loathed schools. Mostly teenager ones. Little kids no more than 5 to 10. Oh, they were delightful. We were happy with them. The main reason was because the teachers, who are still responsible for the kids no matter what, actually followed our guidelines. So naturally we liked the little ones and were genuinely more concerned for them than normal. We all then had our moment of fear when it was reported that a 7-year-old boy had slipped and fallen on the ice, no doubt having been playing with classmates and unintentionally not seeing where he was going. That didn't save his 2 front teeth chipping and a call for our on-site first aid team to come and help with the blood. Luckily, he seemed all right beside the fact the tooth fairy was going to be paying double that night. But for us, lower and middle management, it was the final straw. I wish I had taken a photo of that accident and incident report for posterity, the number of people co-signing it. Part 5. The fallout. Nobody wants a lawsuit, and that kids' parents had grounds to do so like nobody's business. The fact a child had been injured from negligence did not look good on upper management's part, and it wasn't as if they could pretend nothing had happened. Everyone had been telling them about the risk, and when it got to the bigwigs, I can only imagine what was said. Miraculously, and within 2 days of the kids' teeth, they put an anti-slip surface on the brick pavement at what was probably more of a cost than had they just done so in the summer. The barriers were removed, and the number of paper accident and incident reports dramatically decreased. They finally also got around to installing tablet devices with which we could fill in reports without needing to drop position. Our lives were made easier, they got an earful, and that kid probably has a fun story for when he's older and has kids himself. I'd like to say upper management learned their lesson and took our words on board for future endeavors, but that is like expecting the dog to not poop on the carpet after the first time you shove their nose into it. I no longer work there for other reasons, and many of the people who joined in the act of malicious compliance have since gone elsewhere. But for nearly 3 glorious months, you had never seen a department work together like ours in that way before or since. The next one is an entitled People Story. Full disclosure, this was almost a decade ago, and some specific details have been lost to time and my crap memory. Just witnessed something that reminded me of it though, and because this old bat's audacity still irritates me to this day, I thought I'd share. I am also on mobile, so apologies in advance for errors. My phone actively hates me. Anyways, pre-COVID, when I was either 16 or 17, I started going on university tours with my family to try and decide where I might go for secondary school. My parents are loving, but often smothering on top of being stereotypical anxious tourists who need to see a bit of everything when we go somewhere. And these trips almost invariably meant me, my 12 to 13-year-old sibling, and my parents were completely unseparated for 5 days to over a week if it wasn't a simple road trip. Not a single thing would happen on these trips that the whole group didn't experience, unless it was a work call for my mother, works in healthcare and is often on call even on vacation. For this particular trip, we were visiting the University of Michigan for several days of visitor orientation and specific department tours. The 5th day of a 9-day trip had our planned events ending around 11 a.m. I love my parents, but am getting deeply tired of them by this point, as tends to happen to anxious, introverted teenagers unable to recharge their social battery after several days of time being glued to the hip of two people who do not travel well despite what they otherwise believe. My poor sibling is doing worse, but is able to fade into the background because they aren't the focus of the trip, and has always been quiet, so didn't need to speak. Miraculously to me, it looks like my parents are also actually starting to feel the drain, because when we're free for the afternoon, they deliberately choose to visit a quiet suburb of Ann Arbor to drive around with us and get lunch, picking an out-of-the-way diner to try. No one talks on the drive, just keeps to themselves, even once we get into the diner. Everything settles into a booth near a window, and after getting drinks, relaxes into a comfortable silence as 4 people with undiagnosed autism at the time, both my sibling and I have since been. My parents cannot grasp what the fact that autism is almost always genetic means for the "but duck, I can see it." All get personal effects out and settle into what is essentially group parallel play at the table. Nothing is said because there is nothing really to say other than brief discussion of what we might order. My dad and I are on our phones, my sibling has their 3DS out, and my mom is working on her tablet. It's all we have to distract from the hunger pains after 30 minutes passes by after we place our orders and nothing comes out. Behind our booth and me, there is another separate booth with the only other people in the diner besides the waitress and cook. Sitting in it are 3 older folks, 2 women and a man. I barely pay them any mind as we enter and get settled in, as far as I am aware, there is no need for me to. In fact, they mattered so to me that their chatter was utterly indistinct to my tired brain, and I couldn't even say any of their features off the top of my head other than a blurry mix of white and gray hair, except for one of the women. I didn't register at all when she got up, whether it was to use the restroom and this happened after she came back, or if she got out of her booth specifically to do this. But believe me, I noticed when an iron grip of bony fingers suddenly wrapped themselves around my wrist and a hot pink pant blazer and aggressively bright psychedelic skirt appeared in my peripheral next to me. You shouldn't be on your phone at the table. Have some manners and talk to your family. She had this sickeningly sweet voice going on like she was a grandmother doing me a favor by publicly scolding me, and not the 3 other people at the table for doing something my parents clearly had no problem with. And it was very clearly directed at me and only me, because she was staring me down like a hawk. The chatter behind in the other booth has stopped, and my family all currently have their attention on me as I try to pull my hand away and tell her very specifically to, "Don't put your hands on me." My parents do nothing except sit and stare as she grips tighter and continues insisting on me turning off my phone until I grab her wrist with my free hand and yank her off, raising my voice. At this point, anger is for once overriding social anxiety for me because I can't believe an actual stranger is doing this and my parents aren't reacting. I was a young woman. If she had been a man, my dad would have put her on the floor the second she grabbed me. "Do not grab me and give me orders like you know me." She opens her mouth, but my dad finally speaks up this time. "You know what? She's right. Let's put our things away and eat together like a family." To say I was pissed would have been an understatement. I am normally incredibly conflict avoidant at this point in my life, especially when it comes to my parents because it's almost always more trouble than it's worth, but in this moment I am tired, I am starving, and I am angry. Any social anxiety I would normally experience in this scenario is out the window, and I decide in that moment that if they aren't going to stand up for me after a random stranger breaks our comfortable silence, then I was going to make things uncomfortable. The old woman is back in her booth as I turn my phone off, put it face down on the table, and I make some kind of face that my sibling said deeply unsettled them years after the fact. All I can remember is very specifically and as evenly and loudly as I could, responding, "Okay, you to talk? Fine, let's talk." So everyone should put their things away, right? What do you want to talk about? One by one, everyone puts their things away, my dad being the first, and my mom having to be prompted by both my dad and I to do so as the last. Nobody has anything to say. Mind you, because there is nothing to say or discuss. We haven't seen a single thing the others haven't in a week. I don't remember specifics of the rest of the meal, other than that the food takes another 20 minutes or so to come out, so we're all starving, and that I continue to try and prompt conversation with the only questions we don't haven't asked, the most generic crap like how someone's coffee is, what people think of the weather, the plane ride, and the like. They add nothing. My parents won't look me in the eyes or even at each other. My mom tries to get her phone out to check a work email, and I have to remind her that we having a meal without electronics. I had never seen her eye twitch the way it did as she put her phone back and haven't again since. She didn't say anything else. Things don't improve when the food comes, other than that there's an excuse to not be actively talking, though I continue to ask about the food. Curiously, the booth behind us stayed silent except to ask for more coffee. Didn't hear a peep until we left, nor did I look back to see why all their happy conversation suddenly stopped because I wasn't going to give the old witch the satisfaction of recognizing her. I'm not going to lie, there isn't a massively satisfying ending to this. When we got back to our hotel, my parents went to acting like nothing ever happened. I didn't receive an apology from them or the old Karen. This incident was never brought up again except briefly between my sibling and I, years later to make sure it actually happened, because it was wildly out of character for me. That said, my parents have never once tried to enforce a no devices policy since, and I wasn't punished for pushing back like I would have been if I hadn't gotten my point across in some way, though I can't know to what degree because my parents have never acknowledged it. Anyways, don't assume you know people and what's best for them, especially not entire family units, and learn to recognize and get comfortable with silence, please. Also, don't duck and grab people out of nowhere. Anyway, thank you for watching.